Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today on the show, we are speaking with Andrea Paquette, who is the president and co-founder of the Stigma Free Society. Andrea has dedicated her life to ending the stigma of mental illness and has shared her own personal story living with bipolar disorder at hundreds of community events in schools, workplaces. It's so good to see you. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's quite an honor to be here, and it's great to meet you, Tamara.
Yeah, it's really good to see you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So maybe you could start by just explaining the Stigma Free Society and how that started.
Yeah, I would love to share that with you. I'm going to take you back a little bit, back to 2005, and that will help form an idea around the genesis of the Stigma Free Society and how it began and what our purpose is today. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at the age of 25. I experienced a major psychosis where I was believing things, seeing things, hearing things that weren't there. I went into this episode where it was very dangerous because I couldn't tell the difference between reality and non-reality. As I was hospitalized, I didn't know I was sick. It was my friends who brought me there. A lot of things then started to happen from that point. And I noticed there was a significant stigma around mental illness for the simple fact that I even lost my home. My roommates didn't want me back because they were afraid of the fact that I had bipolar disorder. The hospital became my home. And I really lost everything at that point in my life. It definitely was a very difficult time, took many years to rebuild. And then, not taking you through the entire story, but to encapsulate it, to say that as president and co-founder of Stigma Free Society, I first founded the Bipolar Disorder Society of BC in Victoria, actually, in 2010, and renamed as the Stigma Free Society in 2016. So our mission, create awareness around stigma, understanding, and the acceptance of ourselves and other people.
So why do you think there is such a stigma when it comes to mental health?
I feel like we have come a long way in the last decade, and there has been a lot of talk around mental health that is a lot more open than it used to be. But as we were discussing earlier, we still have a lot more work to do. I believe there's a stigma around mental illness because it's not easy to understand. When you see somebody with a broken leg or a physical ailment, it's just easier for somebody to relate to. But when it's in our minds, it's in our brains, it's not visible. And so there comes a lot of judgments, and it breeds stereotypes, and such as people with mental illness are violent, scary, or dangerous, and these attitudes become pervasive. But I feel that over time, we are becoming more educated, and as more people share their stories, that is where I feel is the core of creating acceptance and understanding.
So I'm thinking about like the different types of mental illness. So there's bipolar disorder, like you mentioned, depression, anxiety. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just listing off a few. And do you think there are different levels of stigma depending on what the mental illness is?
Definitely. That is a concern that is very apparent in our society. If you hear the word schizophrenia, that person's a schizophrenic. That is a very common term that is used to describe somebody who has a mental illness, schizophrenia. Bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, which is very highly stigmatized, misunderstood. It is about emotional dysregulation, but there's a lot of help for these illnesses. They are manageable. And I think that's what people need to realize, to open their minds a little bit, to understand, and many of us have, that we can live with these illnesses and we can thrive. So when you say depression, anxiety, I feel like there's less stigma. There is more of an understanding around what it means to be depressed. It isn't sadness, but it is clinical depression. There is a major difference. But I feel like anxiety and depression, for instance, are a lot less stigmatized than, say, bipolar disorder, borderline, or schizophrenia.
I'm okay. As you're talking, I'm thinking about really. I'm thinking about things I've seen in the media, right? Whether I've seen how I've seen people portrayed with mental illness, how I've seen. I'm thinking of some famous people that had episodes in public, really, that were out in became gossip stories, if you will. That stuff doesn't help, does it?
No, it definitely doesn't, because when the media shines a light when people are having mental breakdowns, and it happens to so many people, they're just not in the spotlight. And so, for instance, when it happened to Britney Spears, who has bipolar disorder, there was this light on her experience, which was very negative because she was having a very public mental health crisis. And I think we need to be empathetic and understanding in those situations. But there's a lot of beautiful things that the media does as well. We have celebrities like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He's quite wonderful, and he talks about his own depression and inspires other men to reach out for help. And Demi Lovato, who is a major mental health advocate across the world globally and is a representative for NAMI in the United States, advocating for people with mental illness.
That's a really good point. Yeah, those are two really good examples of people who have taken ownership of their story, really. But again, they're in a position where they can, right? Very different than a position of somebody walking into their workplace and maybe sharing that they have bipolar disorder. And then you're right, everybody has their own idea of what that means or what that is. So when we talk about the stigma and understanding it more, how do we do that? Like, how do we get to that point?
Well, I'm really happy you mentioned the workplace, because this is a situation where a lot of people face barriers and judgments from their fellow coworkers, or even are put in a negative light from their boss. Many people lose their jobs. And one of the things that we can do, for instance, we have a partnership with Stigma Zero Workplace Training. And it is all about mental health education and the elimination of mental illness stigma in the workplace. The key thing, Tamara, is really education when it comes to forming that conversation around mental health that is fair, that promotes respect, and then we hope would equate to acceptance. As well, I feel, again, sharing the personal stories of people and listening to those stories. And I understand that a lot of people may not feel comfortable coming forth with their story, and that's totally okay. And I just know that in sharing my own personal story, it has brought a lot of empowerment, joy, success, a wonderful career that I call my full-time job for the last 8 years, doing what I love. There's a lot of downfalls, obviously, to mental illness, but it presents you with a door and you can decide what you want to do with it.
So let's talk about the workplace for a minute, because we've all worked in places where no one talks about mental health at all. And in fact, your workplace can sometimes be contributing to the detriment of your mental health, your mental wellness, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in a position where you can't speak to your boss about it, or you can't speak to your coworkers, and this is something you're holding in and worried about and scared about. I mean, the thing is, Andrea, we're in a time now that's extremely stressful for people, and people who maybe have never experienced a mental health crisis are experiencing it for the first time.
Definitely.
How do we, if you're that person, if someone's listening right now and they are that person that doesn't know what to do, they know something's wrong, and maybe they've never been even diagnosed or been able to see somebody, because that's the other side of it, Andrea, is it's really hard to see somebody professionally now. Yeah. Where does someone start?
One of the things I really like about TELUS is their health platform. And so you can access a counselor or do talk to somebody, because there are a lot of virtual opportunities for people to reach out, and telehealth is presented as a viable option for people who are dealing with mental health issues. And I know it's very difficult and feels like it may be impossible and can't happen to speak to your boss, your manager, whomever, your coworkers, but you would be surprised how many people are facing the same challenges that you are. And when I think about my own experience, I used to work for the government 10 years ago, and I suffered for a lot of that time because my medication wasn't adjusted properly, and it was really hard to show up every single day on time and be there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There was very little flexibility. So I thought nobody would care. And I thought, perhaps, what's the point? Instead, I approached my boss. I was very clear about having bipolar disorder, and I took a chance. I received accommodation, which was absolutely amazing, flexibility in my schedule. It went well for me, but as I soon came to realize, and I know our jobs are important to us, and I understand the security and the need to keep our jobs in many instances, but for myself, I, at that point, concluded that I wouldn't want to work for an employer unless they were supportive of my mental health. It is a big step to ask for help, but just as somebody with a physical condition can get accommodation in the workplace, so can somebody with a mental health issue. I also know that I was really happy that I reached out and was honest about my situation. It took this big load off of my shoulders, but people only will know for themselves what is right for them.
Yeah. And it can be scary, right? It's terrifying to tell anyone, let alone the person who's paying you weekly or, every 2 weeks to work for them.
Yeah.
So it can be very, very scary. So does the Stigma-Free Society, do you offer, what are some of the things you offer people to help them?
Yeah. Well, we have an extensive array of programming, 6 different programs. One of the programs that I have to say is so near and dear to my heart is our Student Mental Health Toolkit program. Stigma-Free Society has traditionally always focused mainly on youth, and that would be grades 1 all the way up to grade 12, giving presentations in schools, talking about mental health. We are very, very honest about our situations and who we are. The presenters go in and share their personal story, in very much detail, what it's like to have a mental health issue or a mental illness. And it creates a connection with the kids. There's been so many wonderful testimonials of young people saying, I'm going to go get help now. Or I feel like stigma has shattered for me and my grandmother has schizophrenia and I want to see her again after 5 years. So that is a very impacting program. And we also have our agricultural-based rural mental wellness toolkit that we launched 4 months ago for remote and rural communities. They have very specific mental health concerns, and the incidence of suicide is even higher in those communities than it is elsewhere in their urban counterparts. And as well, as I mentioned, Stigma Zero workplace training, as we've partnered with Jason out of Montreal. Stigma Zero is a great program for workplaces to adopt. We have a women's peer support group online for any woman in Canada who is dealing with a mental health issue. We used to have a men's one, but it faltered because a lot of men don't reach out for help, and there is even more of an increased stigma that they face.
Yeah, okay. I had no idea you did all those things. And it really speaks to the fact that if we start talking about these things when we're young, speaking to children about it and in schools, and it really gives you a power over your own mental health. It gives you so you are confident and you can ask for what you need. Because I think when I think about, my own children talking freely about it, they talk about it at school, thinking about how much easier it is for them to talk about things now than it ever was for me to talk about anything, because it's just a part of the fabric now. If you're with you going and speaking at schools, it really allows the younger generation, right, to look at you and go, okay, I'm learning something here and I don't need to be afraid or worried. I can get help and I can talk about this and help friends too, I guess, right? Because
definitely.
Help their friends. So we like to thank our guests by giving back, and we ask our guests to choose a charity that's near and dear to their heart. You chose the Stigma Free Society. Thank goodness. If you wouldn't have chosen your own society, I would have been a little worried. But Andrea, we're going to give $500 to the Stigma Free Society as a thank you to being here and for all the good work you do. You mentioned suicide, and that is something that is never spoken about. I find it is very secretive, and there's a lot of shame around it. How do we open up the conversation about suicide so that we can help create change and support?
Yeah. Well, I didn't mention, Tamara, one of my experiences is I attempted to take my life. I was in the ICU for 3 days. I barely made it. And bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses, we have a higher incidence of suicide than the regular population. It's just a known fact. And when we talk about our experiences, I feel like it's really important to not treat people as fragile, because I think there's a lot of trigger warnings out there. And although I know the intent of something you read or watch to say it has a trigger warning, it has good intent, but at the same time, it's assuming that people with mental illness or people in general can't deal with the harsh facts of reality. And I'm very passionate about that we are not fragile because we have a mental illness. And to hear about suicide and other people's stories, I believe brings a light to the subject. There has been so much shrouding it in, as you said, and clouding it with misunderstanding and shame. You often don't hear the real reason why people pass when it actually is suicide. And that is a really great question. Why are we like that? Well, again, I feel it's miseducation, linking back especially to mental illness and mental health. If we were understanding those issues, then I feel like we would be even more open to talk about suicide, be understanding and accepting. And at Stigma Free Society, we want to get to people before they get to that point, and to ensure that they get the support that they need, because that is never the way out. It is never an option. And the reason why I always have shared my story of, bipolar and suicide, because I don't want anyone to suffer in silence like I did. And I feel like we've, at the society, have saved a lot of lives.
And, what about... I have so many questions, especially around suicide, because I know that from being in the media, we don't report suicide. Yeah. When I worked in a newsroom, and we were taught that in broadcasting in school, you don't report on it, because there was this idea that it then becomes when you report on it, you give other people ideas. And I think it's obviously from your reaction, a very old-fashioned way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
Now I know someone who was in the hospital after attempting to take their own life. And I went to go see them, and they were in the emergency for 2 days in a straitjacket. And there was no psychiatrist at that hospital here in British Columbia. And they were sent home with the promise that they would go see their doctor. And I really couldn't, if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah.
And it made me realize how unsupported a certain section of the population is when it comes to supporting their mental health, their mental wellness.
Yeah.
Do we know enough about, like, if you are suffering greatly, do you need to, in your opinion, do you need to see a specialist like you would go see a specialist for your liver or your kidney or your bladder? Do you need to go see a specialist, or can you just go to a walk-in clinic and deal with what's happening with your brain?
Yeah, I have a lot to say on that.
I know. I'm sorry. There was a lot of questions in one there. I'm so sorry.
Good. Yeah, I've had the same psychiatrist that I had since my suicide attempt 18 years ago. I'm very lucky that I have a specialist. It is so difficult to see a psychiatrist. But one of the really interesting things that's happening across Canada is that GPs are actually getting further training and more intensive training in psychiatry. But one of the things you were talking about with your friend being in that straitjacket and in that horrible place and not getting the help that they needed, I often think of a friend of mine who has bipolar disorder, and she also happened to get breast cancer. And she said she had to visit the mood disorders clinic for psychiatry, and then she would have to go to the cancer clinic, and it was night and day. So it was just like the cancer clinic welcomes you with orange juice and a beautiful comfy chair and asks how you're doing that day. And there's so much empathy and love. There was a time when people wouldn't even say cancer. They'd say the C word. We don't want to, talk about that. But look at how much that's become embraced. Resources are really important. There's obviously a lack of resources for people with mental health issues. I know that our government is trying very hard, but there's a lot of work to do. As for seeing a specialist, I feel the first step is going into a walk-in clinic. If you don't have a GP, definitely. And you can request to see a psychiatrist. And say, for instance, in Victoria, where I live, people will request to see a professional, like a psychiatrist, at a walk-in clinic, and they'll get referred to the mood disorders clinic, which is part of the hospital. And then they will talk to a psychiatrist and get a set amount of visits to assess their case and get the help that they need. So there is help out there. People just need to really reach out for it. And starting out with your doctor or a walk-in clinic actually is a good place. And I also want to mention briefly, there's a lot of crisis lines out there as well. On stigmafreesociety.com, under our community and resources, there are those lines that people can reach out to, national suicide hotlines. And I feel if we are in that place, then it's really important that we reach out for the help that we need.
Really good advice. And not, I love talking to you about this, Andrea, because it's, you have lived experience, and the way you talk about all of this is really with a lot of, not only confidence, but also hope, right? Because there is hope. Even though there are times when you may feel like there is zero hope, right? When someone feels like there is hope, and it's really hard to get to that place. So back to the Stigma Free Society.
Yeah.
What are some steps that people can take, some first steps they can take to maybe eliminate their own stigma and their own false beliefs?
Well, a very small step that people can take is coming to our website, stigmafreesociety.com, and we have this stigma-free tool. And it's this neat little quiz that you can take on our website to start. And it assesses your perceptions and attitudes around specific situations, from perceptions around perhaps what it would be like if you had a person with schizophrenia living in your basement and they were renting from you. And then presenting you with another situation as somebody with a developmental disability. Would you sit with them in class? And it creates a picture for us and gives us this little score at the end. It's not meant to say you did a bad job or a good job, but just to give us something to think about, to assess our perceptions, our thoughts. As well, there's a stigma-free pledge on our website. If people decide after the tool that they want to live a stigma-free life, they want to take that oath, they want to take that next step and learn more, we're the place where people can do that. So taking the pledge is also a first step. With our programming, we have so many different facets when it comes to youth programming, as I mentioned, adult programming, women's programming, men's programming. And I feel that we have something to offer everybody. One of the great things that we do is virtual presentations in classrooms. We used to go in person. I would speak to like 500 students at a time, but COVID shut that down. And instead of rolling over and saying, we can't do this anymore, we really ramped up and in 15 days released the COVID-19 Youth Wellness Toolkit. It's a very special toolkit. It's going to be updated with the current COVID situation because COVID, as you know, has really brought out that conversation around mental health, which is a good thing, but it's really horrific and sad how people are suffering during this pandemic. And it's really brought this issue to light. But I am really happy that we're having more discussions, and this is what needs to happen.
So if are any educators listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to get this woman talking to my class or my school, they can find all that on your website too.
Yes, at studentmentalhealthtoolkit.com, one of the things, it's not just me, I have a team of 20 presenters. We have a staff of 10 now, and we have many amazing volunteers that help operate this society. And if people want a presentation, educators, reach out to us, school counselors. We have many amazing downloadable resources. We have lesson plans as well that's aligned with the BC school curriculum that's integrated in the teaching. So it's not an extra subject, but it's integrated within the subjects itself. So there's a lot of really great information. So the best way to find everything that we're doing is at our main hub of stigmafreesociety.com. And all you have to do is click programs.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure, really, Andrea. I've learned a lot, and obviously we could talk about this for days, I'm sure. I will be on your website for sure and recommending it to my kids' school because I really think it's important that we start these conversations as early as possible because I think that's the only way we're going to get to a future where we are stigma-free, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, again, the website is stigmafreesociety.com, and you can follow on Twitter at sfsociety_, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Andrea, thank you so much. Such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Take care.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.